Have you ever had a scary experience with a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. This happened in Texas. A man and his wife were sleeping in their home when they heard some loud knocking on the front door. The man said, "I was just woken up by someone knocking on our front door, as if they needed to come in." His wife was also woken up. She said, "Who could that be at this hour?" It was around 2 a.m. Whoever it was kept knocking, and eventually the man got out of bed to go see what was going on. He said, "I walked out into the entryway and asked who's there, called out in a normal voice so as not to startle them. Then I heard a small voice say, 'Hello, ma'am. I'm sorry to bother you, but could I please use your telephone?' The man was confused because he hadn't actually asked the person who was out there if they could come in or anything like that. He said, I replied, 'What did you say?' And then he repeated himself again. 'Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but could I please use your telephone?' So the man decided to open the door, but before he did, he told his wife, 'Honey, come here and take a look at this.' His wife came over and asked, 'What do you think he wants?' She was half asleep, so she didn't really know what was going on. But when she saw the boy standing at the door, her eyes opened wide and she started to scream. The man said, 'That's when I noticed the kid's eyes were pitch black, soulless orbs staring back at us. They instantly slammed the door shut and locked it. They turned off the lights in the entryway and hallway and pretended to be asleep. They heard the boy start pounding on the door and screaming, 'Let me in, please, ma'am, let me in, please.' Then he started to slowly walk away. They heard him mumble something under his breath. They couldn't make out what it was. Then they heard his footsteps again, this time running away from their house. The man said, 'My wife and I stayed in bed with the lights off until the morning. We didn't even take a shower or get dressed. We were too afraid to come out of our room. I peeked out the window and saw no one. I don't want to be too dramatic about this, but that kid scared the crap out of me. My wife and I have never seen anything like this before, and we hope we never do again. Those black eyes, they will haunt my nightmares forever.' So, is this a real story, or is it fake? Well, this comes from a website called Messed Up and Pointless, and apparently these are real stories from people. Some of the stories are likely made up, some likely real. Who knows? This one doesn't sound fake to me. Pitch black eyes. What do you think? Leave it in the comments below. If you like scary stories, then check out more content. There are scary videos on there, creepypastas, things that will give you nightmares. Also, the channel has a new podcast. New episodes are released every Wednesday and Saturday. There are 2 podcast episodes available right now. One called The Vanishing of Alveston, and another one called Demon in the Road. You can listen to those right now. Yes. Links are provided below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. If you're still watching, then comment down below. I didn't kill anyone today, did I? That's all I ask. A driver in New York picked up what he thought was a fare late one night. But when he turned around, his passenger was nowhere to be found. So what happened? Let's investigate. It was late at night and Michael was driving his Uber in New York City. It had been a slow night, so he was happy to finally get a ping on his app. The pickup location was only 10 minutes away, so he quickly arrived at the apartment building and pulled up to the curb. As he was getting out of his car to check the front desk, he noticed a young man standing by his car. "Hey there," said the man. "I'm here for an Uber." He opened the back door and got in without a word. Michael buckled up and checked the passenger's safety belt. Then he turned on the radio and started the trip. They were only going a few blocks, so it should only take about 5 minutes. The man didn't seem to be in a rush, so he just sat quietly in the back seat while Michael drove. They made small talk for a bit, discussing sports and the weather. And then the man grew silent again. Michael thought it was strange that he hadn't heard from him in a while, but he didn't think much of it. About 5 minutes into the ride, Michael glanced back at the red taillights. That's when he realized his passenger was nowhere to be seen.
"Ow, what the hell?"
he asked himself, looking around the car. Was the man in the back seat just a figment of his imagination? Had he really just made the entire trip with no one there? Michael slammed on the brakes and turned to look in the back seat again. He could see the door clearly, and it was shut. The window was also closed, meaning that his passenger hadn't opened it to escape unnoticed. Then he noticed something in the corner of his eye. There was a coat on the seat where the man had been sitting, but how could this be? He remembered distinctly picking up a man in the exact spot the app had told him to. He also recalled the man entering the car without any problems. Michael slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and reached for the coat. Maybe if he could find the man, he could wake him up and continue the ride. He slipped off the coat and threw it over his passenger seat. Once he turned around, though, he noticed the man wasn't in the alley anymore. In fact, he couldn't see anyone in the street or on the sidewalk. Frightened, Michael quickly called the police and explained the situation. "I'm sorry, sir, but what exactly is the problem?" asked the officer on the other line. "Well, I had a passenger who disappeared. Picked him up from this address, but when I turned around, he wasn't there anymore." "Sir, are you sure you're not drunk? If you are, I can have you arrested right now for drunk driving." Michael could tell the officer didn't believe him, but he continued explaining. "No, I'm telling you, he was here. This seatbelt was buckled, and there was a coat on the seat, as if someone was sitting there. Okay, sir, we'll send someone to your location to speak with you, but I must warn you, if you're lying to us, you will face severe consequences." Michael hung up the phone and sighed. Hopefully they would believe him this time. A few moments later, he heard sirens and his heart raced. Were they there to arrest him? The police car pulled up beside him and two officers approached his car. "Hello, Mr. Driver. I'd like to ask you a few questions," said one of the officers. "All right," replied Michael nervously. After hearing Michael's story and examining the car, the officers concluded that he was undrunk and that there was indeed a mystery passenger who vanished into thin air. There were no signs of struggle, so it didn't appear to be a kidnapping. The man simply booked an Uber and disappeared. This case baffled the police, and Michael never received the payment for that ride. To this day, he wonders if the man was real or if he had somehow imagined the whole thing. Do you think Michael made the whole thing up, or do you think there really was a mysterious passenger? Let me know in the comments below. And that's all for this episode. See you next time. Welcome back to my channel. For more stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button. In today's video, we will be looking at security camera footage from China. It shows a night guard being followed by his doppelganger. The story comes from Hangzhou, China, where a worker was working the night shift at a factory. His job was to sit in a security booth and monitor the CCTV cameras around the property. Occasionally, he would have to walk around the factory to check things out in person. On the night in question, the guard had just finished making his rounds and was heading back to the security booth when he noticed something strange on the monitors. A man who looked exactly like him was walking in the opposite direction. It looked like his doppelganger had walked past all the security cameras without triggering any alarms. The guard immediately called his colleagues to tell them what he had seen. They told him to keep an eye on the situation and to call the police if the man did anything suspicious. As the doppelganger continued to walk around the factory, the guard followed him on the CCTV monitors. He noticed that his doppelganger seemed to be staring directly at the cameras. In fact, he seemed to be looking directly at the security booth where the guard was sitting. The guard became so unnerved that he decided to go outside to see what was going on. As he opened the door to his booth, he saw his doppelganger walking towards him. The doppelganger stopped and stared at the guard for a moment before breaking into a smile and waving at him. The guard, still unnerved, called his colleagues again and told them to come outside. When they arrived, they too were stunned by what they saw. There was his doppelganger waving at them as if he was trying to say goodbye. Then just as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished. The men searched the area but couldn't find him anywhere. They checked the CCTV footage to see if it could provide any answers, but it only showed the doppelganger walking away from the factory. The footage ended there. There was no record of him leaving the premises. The guard claimed that he had not slept for 3 days straight because he was waiting for his doppelganger to return. To this day, the mystery of the doppelganger has not been solved. Some people believe that it was a ghost, while others believe that it was a living person who had somehow managed to sneak onto the factory grounds without being detected. The story gained a lot of attention online, with many people sharing their thoughts on what could have happened. One user wrote, "Maybe he's your long-lost twin brother who was separated at birth." Another user wrote, "This is a classic case of the Chinese government using AI robots to spy on its citizens." Of course, this is just a theory and there is no evidence to support it, but it's interesting to think about nonetheless. So, what do you think? Is this a case of a real-life doppelganger or something more sinister? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so that you never miss an upload from my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I was a resident assistant in college, and I had one of the weirdest situations happen to me during my sophomore year. It was about 11 p.m., and I was getting ready for bed when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find one of my residents, Sarah, standing there with her stuff bags, suitcases, the whole 9 yards. She had just gotten back from class and wanted to move back into her room. I was confused because she had been gone for about 2 weeks, and I had unseen her around campus at all. "Oh, hey," I said. "It's so good to see you. Welcome back. How was break?" "Good," she replied. "Yeah, it was nice to get away for a bit." We walked into her room, and I noticed that her side of the room was completely empty. All of her stuff was gone. There were no posters on the walls. There were no clothes in her closet. Her bed was completely made, as if she had never slept in it. Everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, she said. "It's fine, but don't worry about it." But I couldn't help but worry. I knew that she was going through a rough breakup about a week before she left, but that was just 2 weeks ago. Surely she would have at least said something to me or texted me or called me. But this was the first time I had seen her since she had left, and now her room was completely empty. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you want me to call campus security or an ambulance or something?" No, I'm fine. Really, it's just, personal stuff. I just needed some space for a little while." She started unpacking her stuff, and it became clear to me that she was untelling me the truth. If she had just needed some space, she would have taken her stuff with her. But everything that she was pulling out of her bag was brand new. She took out a blow dryer, curling iron, hair straightener, makeup brushes, all sorts of stuff that clearly did not belong to her. "Sarah, where did all your stuff go? And why do you have all of this stuff? I don't know what you're talking about. But don't lie to me. You clearly have some sort of explanation for what is going on here, so just tell me what happened." She sighed. "Okay, fine, I lied to you. I'm sorry, I just needed some space. I didn't mean to leave my room like that. I didn't know what to do." "What are you talking about? What happened?" I don't even know how to explain this. It's so stupid. Just tell me." When I went home for break, I told my parents that I wanted to break up with my boyfriend. They weren't really supportive, to say the least. They told me that I had to make up with him, or they would take away my phone, and my laptop, and I wouldn't be able to talk to any of my friends. So I came back here instead. I thought that maybe if I pretended that I didn't have a boyfriend anymore, then they would stop bugging me about it. So I got rid of all of his stuff in my room, and I took all of this stuff from my parents' house so that I could make it look like I had a new boyfriend. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to lie to you like that. I didn't know what else to do. I felt bad for her. Her parents clearly weren't being very supportive, but lying to me was not the answer. I was her friend, and she should have been able to come to me with whatever she was going through. "I'm gonna let you get settled in, but we need to talk about boundaries in our friendship, and also some other stuff. Okay? Okay," she said. "Thank you for listening." I left her alone to unpack her stuff. I did end up having a talk with her about boundaries and all that stuff later, but that's not important to this story. The important thing is that I was still suspicious. Something about her story just didn't add up. So I went to check her story. I went to the main office and asked the RA, who had been there before me, if he had any record of the previous occupant of Sarah's room. He looked it up and told me that there was no record of anyone ever living there. He checked with the housing office, and they told him the same thing. Nobody had ever lived in that room, as far as anyone could tell. Sarah had just appeared one day last semester, and nobody had ever questioned it because she had always had a roommate. But now that her roommate was gone, it was like she had never existed. If you enjoyed this scary story, make sure to follow for more.
Thanks for watching.
Welcome back to my channel. Today's story is The Man in the Attic. This happened in Seattle. A married couple and their 2 kids moved into a home in Seattle, Washington. The house was big with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and a giant attic. It was perfect for the growing family. A few weeks after they moved in, the woman started noticing that food was going missing from the fridge. At first, it was just the basics like milk and eggs, but then more expensive cuts of meat were disappearing too. She asked her husband if he'd been buying extra meat for work lunches, but he said no. So together they set up a camera to catch whoever or whatever was raiding their fridge. They didn't have to wait long for an answer. One night they were eating dinner when they saw the live feed from the camera. On screen they watched as a dark figure crawled out of the attic access door. It was a man, who looked to be in his late 20s, with a scraggly beard and unkempt hair. He shuffled over to the fridge and opened it, pulling out a container of chicken and a bag of lettuce. He ate straight from the packaging, making a huge mess. Then he did something even more disgusting. He pulled out a carton of milk and drank from it directly, leaving his filthy fingerprints all over it. Then he grabbed some eggs and, well, you get the picture. After he finished his midnight snack, the man left the same way he came, disappearing back into the attic. The couple immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. The police did a sweep of the house and found nothing. They told the couple to change the locks and get rid of the evidence, meaning the food. And that was that. Case closed, or so they thought. Over the next few days, the couple tried to piece together who this guy could be and how he'd managed to stay hidden for so long. The house had been built 100 years ago, and the attic was completely off limits. The only way to get up there was through the hatch in the main living area. But they never heard anyone else in the house, and their 2 kids would have definitely seen someone breaking in. Plus, the attic was freezing cold. No one ever went up there voluntarily. So why was this guy living in their attic, and how did he get in? Determined to find answers, the couple checked their home security footage to see if they could spot the intruder again. To their surprise, they saw him again. But it wasn't just him. There was another man, one they recognized. It was their neighbor. Their neighbor had somehow been letting this guy into their house. But why? And why was he only taking food? The neighbor was a quiet guy. They'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with him. He kept to himself and mostly stayed out of sight. But when the police were called, he seemed to know a lot about the situation. Too much, actually. When the cops asked him if he knew anything about the break-in, he was quick to offer details. Details that only the intruder would know. Like how the guy liked to take the chicken straight out of the fridge and eat it raw. And he knew that the attic hatch was the only way to get in, because he mentioned it in passing to the neighbor one night. And the neighbor had commented on how lucky they were that their kid had unfound him up there. It became clear that the neighbor was involved and that he'd been setting the intruder up by giving him information about the house. But why the police asked the neighbor if he knew the intruder, and he admitted that he did. He said that the man had recently gotten out of prison and was trying to make an honest living, but he couldn't find a job because of his record, so the neighbor had taken him in, given him food, and let him sleep in the attic. The police arrested the neighbor, and of course the intruder. They charged the neighbor with providing shelter to a fugitive and the intruder with burglary. As for the couple, they got their house back and made sure to install better locks. But every time they hear a scratching sound in the middle of the night, they can't help but wonder if it's the ghost of the man in the attic. That was the end of the story. If you like this kind of content, stay tuned for more. Now this is a scary story that's happened to me twice. I was traveling with my friends. We're driving down some dark country road. There's hardly any light. It's just pitch black. And we see a little sign in the distance. It says motel vacancies. So we figure, hey, let's check it out. See if they've got a room for us. We drive up. It looks pretty run down, but it's cheap and we're tired. So we decide to stay there. We get checked in. It's one of those places where you just kind of check in at the front desk and they hand you a key and that's it. You go to your room. Now, our room's pretty much just like how you would expect a roadside motel room to be. But one thing I do notice is that there's an old, leather-bound guest book sitting on the nightstand. I think to myself, wow, I haven't seen one of those in a long time. I remember as a kid going on vacations, my parents, and we would always stop at these little motels, and they always had these books where you could sign as a guest. So anyway, I'm just signing in the book. I guess I didn't write anything particularly crazy or funny, just my name and where I'm from. My friends and I head out to dinner. We're eating, having a good time, talking about how crappy the motel is, etc. After dinner, we come back, go to sleep. The next morning, we check out. We're on the road again. About a week later, my friend calls me up. He's laughing. Says, dude, I haven't laughed that hard in a long time. You won't believe what I found. Says, remember that guest book from that motel? I have a bad feeling about this, I think. What did you find? Says, I was looking through it again and I realized something weird. Says, your name was in there, but it wasn't written by you. It's like, what do you mean? He said, dude, you weren't the only person who signed the guest book. There was another person who also wrote their name. I thought, okay, maybe I didn't pay attention and someone else signed it after me. No, he said, no, the other signature was dated 5 years prior to when we stayed there. It was written in the same handwriting as your signature. I was freaked out, man. It's like, how can there be 2 people who signed the same book in the exact same handwriting 5 years apart? I don't know. Maybe it's the universe trying to tell us something. Maybe it's fate, or maybe there's something more to it than that. Who knows? I'm not really superstitious, but I do find that story a bit creepy. Yeah, there's definitely something creepy about that story. And it's even creepier because it's happened to you twice. That's scary. I would never stay at a place like that, especially if I knew that people were dying there. Yeah, if you ever do travel, Be careful. Watch out for those ghost riders. They might be trying to communicate with you. They might be trying to tell you something, or they might just want to scare the living crap out of you. Either way, it's not worth the risk, man. And that's all for tonight. I'll see you guys next time. Hi, campers. It was nighttime at the Lake Reflection campers. All of the campers were asleep except for one. It was me. Couldn't sleep because there was a big storm outside. Ow. The wind was howling, and the rain was pouring. Suddenly, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, and I saw something strange. I jumped out of bed and ran to my window. Below my cabin, in the lake, I could see the reflection of our camp. In the distance, I saw the reflection of our cabins, the mess hall, and even the flag. But something was wrong. The reflections didn't move when the wind blew through the trees. The reflections just swayed gently. And that wasn't the only weird thing. In the lake, I could also see the reflection of the campfire. But the fire wasn't making any waves. There were no ripples or movement in the water at all. Then I saw something really strange. The reflection of one of the counselors, Miss Leanna, was waving at me from the lake. I waved back, and she waved again. But when I looked closer, I realized that she hadn't moved at all. Her lips weren't moving, and her hand wasn't even moving either. She was frozen in place. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Could it be possible that the reflections in the lake were real? Or was this just a dream? As I watched, more and more reflections began to move. At first they were subtle, like a slight shift or a gentle wave. But then they became more pronounced. I saw the reflection of David from the fishing cabin. He was taking a step toward the mess hall, so I took a step back. His reflection took a step back as well. Then I saw the reflection of Miss Diaz from the archery cabin. She was walking toward the lake. So I walked a few steps forward. She walked a few steps forward as well. I kept watching the reflections as they moved closer and closer. They were almost like ghosts, pale and translucent. I wanted to call out to the others, but I was afraid to break the spell. Odd. What if the reflections could somehow hurt us? Suddenly, the reflection of Miss Liana appeared at my window. She was smiling at me and beckoning with her finger. I wanted to reach out and touch her, but as soon as I did, I felt a jolt of pain in my hand. Startled, I pulled away. The reflection of Miss Liana stumbled back as if she had been pushed. Then I had an idea. Maybe the reflections weren't ghosts or specters at all. Maybe they were our friends and family. Maybe they had come to warn us about the storm. With newfound determination, I got out of bed and went to get the other campers. When they saw the reflections, some were scared, but I told them to try touching one. They all felt the same jolt of pain that I had felt. We knew then that we had to do something. We gathered all of the campers and counselors together, and we all reached out to the reflections. At first, the reflections seemed to recoil, but then they began to move forward. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, they began to pull us toward the lake. We all fell into the water, but it was only a few inches deep, and when we looked around, we realized that the storm had passed and the sun was shining through the trees. As we stood there shivering, we knew that we had been saved by the reflections in the lake. From that day on, we never forgot the mysterious reflections that had saved us from the storm. Whenever we saw a still lake, we knew that there was more to it than met the eye. And we also knew that we should never turn our backs on a reflection. A man was jogging down a dark street. All of the streetlights were turned off, except for the ones that were directly in front of him. But as he approached them, they would flicker and then go out. At first, he thought nothing of it. It was until the third or fourth light went out, when he started to get a bit uneasy. He slowed his pace and began to walk. The silence of the night was only broken by the sound of his footsteps and his shallow breathing. He looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone following him, but there was no one there. There was not a single soul on the empty street behind him or ahead. And the few cars that did pass by were too far away for him to hear their engines. Still feeling uneasy, he continued walking. Then he noticed something strange. One of the streetlights up ahead was still on, wasn't flickering. As he got closer, he could make out the shape of a man standing underneath it. The man was leaning back, as if relaxing, with his arms behind his head, as if waiting for something. This was too much for our jogger. He broke into a run, desperate to put as much distance between himself and the mysterious figure as possible. But the more he ran, the brighter the streetlight seemed to burn, and the louder the sound of his own breathing and heartbeat pounded in his ears. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the light had not flickered. The man was still standing there, leaning back, still with his arms behind his head. He didn't seem to be moving at all. Our jogger couldn't take it anymore. He doubled his speed, pounding the pavement as he desperately tried to escape the feeling of dread that was slowly consuming him. Finally, he reached the corner and turned, hoping to find some relief from the oppressive atmosphere of the deserted street. But as he did, he realized with growing horror that the street he had entered was the same one he had come from. There was no escape. He turned back, but it was too late. The streetlight had begun to flicker again. The man standing underneath it was now silhouetted against the light. The jogger could now see the outline of his face, and it was then that he noticed the smile. The man was smiling, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, cruel, predatory grin that promised nothing but pain and suffering.
Odd.
The jogger broke into a run, panic surging through him like a tidal wave. He had to get away, to escape the clutches of the man in the streetlight. He pounded the pavement, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how fast he went, the streetlight always stayed one step ahead of him, its light burning brightly in the darkness, illuminating the path that he had to follow. He could hear the man's laughter now, echoing through the street, mocking him, enjoying his fear. The jogger wanted to scream, to call out for help, but no sound came out. His throat was hoarse with terror. He stumbled on, his body trembling, his mind screaming at him to stop, to turn back, to face his pursuer. But he couldn't. He was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. As he ran, the streetlights began to flicker again, one by one, till every single one on the street was illuminated, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted in the night. In the distance, he could hear the sound of police sirens, but they seemed distant, unreal. He was trapped in a world of darkness and fear, and the man in the streetlight was enjoying every moment of it. Then suddenly, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The streetlight flickered one last time and went out, plunging the world into darkness. The man's laughter echoed through the empty street, a cruel, mocking sound that seemed to mock the jogger's terror. And in the darkness, the jogger fell to his knees, his whole body racked with sobs, knowing that he had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The man in the streetlight had one. A babysitter was watching over an infant for the first time. It was just a simple job, the usual stuff: lullabies, changing diapers, feeding, putting the baby down for a nap, and then waiting. But this particular baby would often wake up before her parents got home.
Oh.
So the babysitter would keep herself busy by playing with the baby until the parents arrived. On this day, everything was going well. The baby had finally gone to sleep after a particularly vigorous bout of colic. The sitter went into the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea when she heard the front door open and close. She knew the parents were home, so she grabbed her phone and snapped a quick picture of the sleeping baby before going to check on the other one. It was until hours later, when she was folding the baby's clothes, that she picked up her phone again and looked at the photo she'd taken earlier. At first she thought nothing of it, but then a chill ran down her spine, and she felt a lump form in her throat. In the photo, which was supposed to be of the sleeping baby, there was another face. It was pale and gaunt and seemed to be peering through the curtain. Startled, the babysitter quickly turned around to look out the window. There was no one there. She stared at the photo on her phone, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, she thought. Or maybe it was a shadow cast by a branch from the tree outside. But as she looked at it again, she could have sworn the face was moving. Her heart began to race, and she started to panic. What if there was an intruder in the house? What if someone had broken in and was now stalking the baby? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. She told herself that it was probably just a branch from the tree. But as she looked back at the photo, she noticed something else. The face in the window wasn't quite right. It didn't seem to have a nose or any facial features at all. It was definitely looking at the camera. She didn't know what to do. Should she call the police? What if they thought she was crazy? She decided to wait a little longer and see if the face came back. She knew that if she called the police without any concrete evidence, they wouldn't take her seriously. She needed proof. So she pulled up a chair next to the window and waited, and waited, and waited. As the minutes ticked by, her anxiety started to build. She tried to distract herself by reading a book, but the words swam before her eyes. She couldn't focus. All she could think about was the face in the photo and what it might mean. Then, just as she was about to give up, she saw it again. The face appeared in the window, and this time it was closer. It seemed to be smiling at her. A chill ran down her spine and she gasped. The face was gone. Then she heard a noise. It was a small sound, like the tapping of a finger on the glass. She turned around to look at the window, but there was nothing there. But then she looked down at the photo on her phone, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. In the photo, the face was even clearer than before, and if she focused really hard, she could have sworn it was moving. That's when the door creaked open and the parents came in. They were smiling, relieved to be home. They asked the babysitter how the kids were, and she showed them the photo on her phone. First they were confused, but then their faces turned ashen. "Oh my God," the mother whispered, grabbing the phone from the babysitter's hands. "I think we need to call the police." As the police were called and the parents recounted what had happened, the babysitter couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Finally, someone else was going to believe her. But then she heard the mother's voice. "You didn't lock the kids' room door, did you?" The babysitter shook her head. "Well, then this is all your fault," the mother snapped. "How could you be so careless?" The babysitter's eyes widened in surprise. "But the face, the photo," she stammered. "It was just a trick of the light," the mother said dismissively. "There's no face. There's no intruder. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to talk to the police." The babysitter watched as the parents went to the children's room, their faces grim. She knew that they didn't believe her, but she also knew that she had seen the face in the window. As the police arrived and began asking questions, the babysitter couldn't help but think that maybe she should have listened to her gut instincts and called the police sooner. But then again, maybe it was just a trick of the light. "Hi, I'm here with a story. This one comes from a viewer who says she bought an old house in Illinois with her husband. It's back in 2019. She says that the house was built in 1920 and was mostly empty when they got it. She also says that the previous owner had passed away and that there were no known living relatives. But the owner did leave behind some interesting things, like a journal detailing daily life in the early 1900s. That's actually how the new owner found out the name of the previous owner, Helen, and the year that she lived there, 1923. One day, while doing some home renovations, the owners found a door hidden behind some paneling. The door was locked and it didn't appear to go anywhere. It was just a solid wood door with what looked like a very old lock on it. First they thought it might have been a closet or something, but it was too big for that. Tried opening it, and when it didn't, they forced it open. What they found was not what they expected at all. Behind the door was a flight of stairs leading down into darkness. They went down the stairs carefully, because they didn't know if they would break through the floor or something. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a light switch which turned on a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And then they saw that the stairs continued around and around until they formed a circle. And in the middle of the circle was a table with a single drawer. As they were exploring, they heard some strange noises from above, and they looked up to see some bricks fall from above. It sounded like a small avalanche of falling bricks. They figured that the house settling would explain that. But they were concerned about the safety of continuing their exploration. They decided to come back another day to figure out what to do about the stairs. When they returned, they brought a flashlight and a camera. They shined the light into the room and saw what appeared to be thousands of tiny pebbles covering the floor. They also noticed small indentations in the walls as though something had been pushed against them over and over again. When they opened the drawer of the table, they found hundreds of children's drawings. Some were folded neatly and some were rolled up. Many of them were still attached to their wooden dowel. All of the drawings appeared to be of the same two children, a boy and a girl. They appeared to be siblings since they were often labeled Billy and Susie. There was also a label on the back of most of them that said, "Helen's Children." But the most peculiar thing about the drawings was the date on them. The drawings were dated 40, 50, and even 60 years into the future. Why would a child draw a picture of what they will look like when they are 50 years old? And why would those drawings be in the house's basement, hidden behind a secret door? They don't have any answers, but they have some theories. And one is that maybe the children died in some kind of accident, and their mother hid their remains in the basement. But if that were true, why would she have drawn pictures of them as adults? Another possibility is that the children were born with some kind of birth defect that made them look older than they were. That could explain the drawings. But what about the door? Why would there be a secret door leading to a room filled with drawings? Whatever the explanation, our viewers' imaginations have run wild with possibilities. One commenter suggested that the children were sent back in time to live out their natural lives in the past. I love that idea. I think that would make a great episode of Doctor Who. If you want to hear more stories like this one, stay tuned for more content. But when they arrived at the location of the disconnected payphone, things got even weirder. In 2006, a woman in Ohio called 911 in the middle of the night and screamed, "Help me! He's killing me!" before the line went dead. When the operator tried to call back the number, it was disconnected. The operator then traced the call to an abandoned payphone in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods. It had been disconnected for more than 20 years. The operator couldn't believe what they were hearing. The last thing they heard from the woman was a scream. And now there was nothing but the sound of crickets when they tried to call back the number. The line was dead. There was no way that this phone, which hadn't worked in over 20 years, could have been used to make the call. The sheriff's office was baffled. When they arrived at the location of the disconnected payphone, things got even weirder. Not only was the phone still there, disconnected and out of order, just as the operator had told them, but they also found a man standing next to it who matched the description of the person the woman had screamed about. His name was Gary, and he had apparently been camping in the area. Gary told the police that he'd heard the woman screaming in the forest, and he'd gone to investigate.
Ow.
But when he got to the payphone, she'd already hung up and he didn't know where she'd gone. He said that he'd called the police himself, but the officers found no record of this. Gary started to get nervous. The police searched the area for any sign of the woman, but they found nothing. They also searched Gary's campsite and found nothing. But when they looked in his car, they found a pair of women's shoes that matched the ones the woman had been wearing, according to the operator. Gary confessed that those weren't his and he was arrested. It turned out that Gary and the woman had been childhood sweethearts, but their families had forbidden them from seeing each other because Gary was poor and his family didn't approve of the relationship. The two of them decided to run away together, but on the day they were supposed to meet up, Gary never arrived. The woman was never seen again. Her family believed that Gary had killed her and buried her body in the woods. And even though he confessed to being at the payphone, Gary swore that he'd only been there to look for his one true love. But when the police searched the area around the payphone, they found something that proved otherwise. It wasn't bones or a buried body, but a piece of cloth that matched the dress the woman had been wearing that night. Gary crumbled and confessed to everything. He took the police to a nearby lake where he'd dethroned her cell phone, and they recovered it. Then he led them to a clearing in the woods where he'd buried her body. To this day, nobody knows why Gary called the police that night. Maybe he wanted to confess to the crime he'd committed 23 years earlier. Maybe he was trying to get help for the woman he still loved. Or maybe he was just trying to get caught so that he could finally stop running. What do you think? Let me know your theories in the comments. And if you want to hear more crazy stories like this one, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and a sparkling lake, lived a poor but honest woodcutter. He had a beautiful daughter named Elsie, who was known for her infectious laughter and kind heart. But one day, a terrible tragedy struck. Elsie's mother fell gravely ill, and the only cure was a rare herb that grew deep within the whispering woods. Despite the woodcutter's fear of the perilous forest, he decided to venture in and search for the herb. He grabbed his trusty axe in a basket, kissed his wife goodbye, and ventured into the dark, dense woods. After what felt like hours, the woodcutter found the herb and quickly gathered some in his basket. As he turned to leave, he heard a tiny whimper. Startled, he looked around but saw nothing. Assuming it was just a bush or a frightened animal, he continued his journey home. Back in the village, after giving the herb to his wife, she slowly began to recover. Elsie, worried about her mother's illness, asked if she could go to the forest to find the herb. Her father, fearing for her safety, refused. When he told her the next morning that her mother was much better, Elsie's disappointed face crumpled with tears. Seeing this, the woodcutter's heart broke. He knew he couldn't keep her locked up forever, so he decided to teach her how to defend herself. For weeks, he trained her in the art of fighting, teaching her to be strong and fearless. Finally, he deemed her ready and let her go to the forest with him. Together they searched, but to no avail. The herb had disappeared. Disheartened, they returned home. But Elsie wasn't deterred. Every day she would ask her father if she could go back to the whispering woods to look for the herb. Each time he'd reply, "No, my darling, it's too dangerous." Each time she'd come back home, more determined than before. Then one day, when the woodcutter went to work, Elsie decided to sneak out and search for the herb by herself. She ventured into the dark, dense woods, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. Suddenly, she heard a twig snap. Startled, she turned around and saw a ferocious wolf emerging from behind a tree. Thinking fast, Elsie pretended to be a harmless rabbit nibbling on a carrot. The wolf, taken aback by her strange behavior, tilted its head in confusion. Seizing the opportunity, Elsie made a dash for a nearby cave. The wolf, regaining its senses, lunged for her, but it was too late. Elsie had vanished into the cave. Inside, the cave was pitch black, and the entrance was now blocked by a rock slide. Trapped and terrified, Elsie curled up in a ball, waiting for the worst. But the wolf, unable to see in the darkness, eventually slunk away. As the sun began to set, Elsie, still trembling, started to explore the cave. To her surprise, she found a small opening that led to a tunnel. Crawling through, she emerged on the other side, only to find herself in a clearing in the middle of the whispering woods. But something was different. The trees here were taller and wider, and the air was filled with a magical glow. In the center of the clearing stood a magnificent cottage made of glistening stone. Elsie, filled with both curiosity and trepidation, cautiously approached the cottage. As she drew closer, she noticed an old woman tending to a small vegetable patch. Elsie, mustering all her courage, knocked on the door.
"Oh, why?"
The old woman turned, revealing a kind face with twinkling eyes. "Come in, child," she said with a warm smile. Inside, the cottage was cozy and inviting. Elsie explained her predicament, and the old woman, sensing her fear, offered her some tea. "Don't worry, child," she said. "I know a way to protect you from the wolf." With that, she took Elsie to a nearby stream and gave her a small pebble. "Hold this in your hand," she instructed, "and the wolf will think you are one of us." Elsie, still shaken but grateful, thanked the old woman and hurried home. The next day, she went back to the Whispering Woods to look for her father. But as she entered the forest, she heard a familiar growl. The wolf had found her. Thinking quickly, Elsie clutched the pebble and screamed, "Help, Grandma! He's trying to eat me." The wolf, confused, hesitated. Then, seeing her small stature and the setting sun, it assumed she was just a little girl playing. Shaking its head, it trotted away. Relieved, Elsie continued her search for her father. But to her dismay, she couldn't find him anywhere. Exhausted and disheartened, she sat down on a nearby log, only to be enveloped in a warm embrace. "Daddy!" she cried, throwing her arms around him. The woodcutter, overcome with emotion, held her tight, vowing to never let her out of his sight again. Together, they walked back to the village, hand in hand, their bond unbreakable.